There's a field of study in the Vaelthari Hegemony's academic tradition called comparative predation analysis. It is a subdiscipline of xenobiology, and it concerns itself with the relationship between predator species and the civilizations that encounter them, how civilizations respond to apex predators in their environment, how they manage them, how they survive them, and how the presence or absence of significant predators on a homeworld, cultural development of the species that evolves there. It is a well-funded field. It has produced important work. It has a dedicated journal, 3 university departments, and a prestigious annual award named after the researcher who first demonstrated the correlation between homeworld predator pressure and the development of cooperative social behavior in sapient species. Before humanity, the field's central finding was consistent across every studied case. Sapient species, upon achieving sufficient technological capability, eliminate or severely reduce the predator populations on their homeworlds. This is not cruelty. It is survival logic. Apex predators kill sapiens. Sapiens, given the tools to stop being killed, use them. The predators are driven back, confined, reduced. The sapient civilization expands into the space the predators once occupied. This is the pattern. It has held, without exception, across 31 documented cases. The Vaelthari drove their apex predators to extinction within 2,000 years of achieving basic tool use. The Solen Imperium's homeworld has no large carnivores remaining in the wild. They exist only in controlled preservation facilities, studied, maintained, and carefully kept from any contact with general population. The Thalmori, who are philosophically committed to the preservation of life in all forms, maintain their homeworld's predator species in it. Protected reserves that are also, not coincidentally, located on islands, accessible only by controlled transport. Every civilization in the galactic community had, in its own way, dealt with its predators by putting as much distance between itself and them as the available technology allowed. And then humanity joined the galactic community, and the Comparative Predation Analysis Department at the Vaelthari's oldest university received a data package from the human contact files. The department head, a respected scholar named Preth-Saan, who had been doing this work for 30 years, to read it once, read it again, walk to her colleagues' office, hand them the file, and say, very quietly, "I need you to look at this, and tell me if I'm reading it correctly." Her colleague read it. He read it again. He said, "You're reading it correctly." They looked at each other. They did what? Preth-Saan said. The data package was part of the standard cultural exchange that the Vaelthari Hegemony had been conducting with humanity for 6 years. It was not flagged as sensitive or unusual. It was filed under the heading Human-Animal Relationships, Domestic Companions, and had been sitting in the xenobiology department's incoming data queue for 3 months, behind 17 higher priority packages, because domestic companions sounded like the kind of mild sociological data that could wait. It could not wait. Preth-Saan had opened it on a quiet Tuesday afternoon because she was clearing her queue, and it was next. She had allocated, in her mental schedule, approximately 20 minutes for it. She was still reading 4 hours later. The data package documented humanity's relationship with domesticated animals. This was, on its face, not remarkable. Most civilizations had some form of animal husbandry, the management of non-sapient species for food production, labor, or other economic purposes. The Vaelthari kept several domesticated species. Standard practice. The xenobiology department had files on all of them. What was not standard practice? What was not in any file in the xenobiology department's entire 30-year archive was what humanity had domesticated. The first animal in the package was designated, in the human taxonomy, Canis lupus familiaris. The common name in the human language of the primary data set was dog. Preth-Saan had pulled up the ancestral species data automatically, cross-referencing the phylogenetic information in the pack. The ancestral species of Canis lupus familiaris was Canis lupus, the gray wolf. She had pulled up the gray wolf's ecological profile. She had read it. She had read the predation data, the territorial behavior data, the pack hunting strategy data, the prey species list, which included animals significantly larger than the wolf itself, up to including large ungulates that the wolf brought down through coordinated pack pursuit over distances of up to 20 kilometers. She had read the wolf profile. She had read the domesticated dog profile. She had looked at the photographs. The photographs showed humans interacting with Canis lupus familiaris in contexts that the human cultural documentation described as play, companionship, emotional support, working partnership, and she had read this word 3 times, love. The photographs showed humans sleeping in the same space as their domesticated apex predators. Humans allowing their domesticated apex predators to approach. Human young. Human young sitting on, lying against, and in several documented cases, apparently using as pillows their domesticated apex predators. Preth-Saan was a scholar. She was not given to dramatic responses. She had spent 30 years studying predation with the equanimity of someone who had made peace with the fact that the universe contained things that ate other things, and that this was simply how biology worked. She read the gray wolf profile again. She looked at the photograph of a small human child asleep against a large domestic dog, both of them apparently at complete peace. She went to her colleague's office. The wolf was not, it turned out, the most alarming part. Preth-Saan spent 2 weeks going through the full data package, because the full data package was comprehensive, covering every major human domesticated species, and she had initially only reviewed the first section. She went through it systematically, with the methodical thoroughness of a scholar who understood that she was looking at something that was going to require a complete theoretical revision of her field's central model, and who wanted to make sure she had the complete picture before she revised anything. The wolf had been domesticated, the data indicated, approximately 15,000 years ago. It had, over that period, been selectively bred into hundreds of distinct varieties ranging in size from animals small enough to fit in a human hand to animals larger than several of the Vaelthari's own domesticated working species. All varieties retained, in modified form, the behavioral architecture of the ancestral wolf, the pack bonding, the territorial instinct, the prey drive, but had been adapted to orient those behaviors toward humans rather than wolf pack members. 15,000 years. Hundreds of varieties. Integrated into every aspect of human society. Working, herding, hunting, guarding, companionship, therapy, search and rescue, military service. Military service. Preth-Saan wrote that down and put a notation next to it that said, "Return to this." She moved to the next species. Felis catus, the domestic cat. Ancestral species. Felis sylvestris libica, the African wildcat. Domesticated approximately 10,000 years ago. The wildcats. Ecological profile showed a solitary ambush predator with retractable claws, binocular vision adapted for low-light hunting, and predation behavior described in the data as extraordinarily efficient, with a kill rate significantly higher than most comparable predator species. The domestic cat's profile showed that it had been integrated into human domestic spaces so thoroughly that it was present in the homes of approximately 1/3 of all human households globally, that it was considered by its human companions a source of comfort and affection, that it frequently engaged in play behavior with human children, that humans created, in extraordinary volume, artistic and cultural content depicting their domestic cats in context of humor, endearment, that it still regularly killed things, and that humans found this charming. Preth-Saan wrote, "They find it charming." She kept going. Equus cabalus, the domestic horse. Ancestral species. A large plains animal with a kick force sufficient to shatter bone, capable of sustained speeds that matted. Pursuit on foot by most species essentially impossible. Domesticated approximately 6,000 years ago. Used by humans for, she read the list, transportation, agriculture, warfare, sport, and companionship. Warfare. She had now written warfare twice in her notes, under 2 different species. She made a separate note. Humans integrated their domesticated predators and prey into their military history at multiple points. Return to this. She kept going. Aquila, Chrysaetos, the golden eagle, a raptor with a wingspan of up to 2.4 meters, talons capable of exerting grip pressure sufficient to crush bone, eyesight rated at approximately 8 times the acuity of the human eye itself, used in a practice called falconry, a human tradition documented across multiple cultures, of training eagles and other raptors to hunt cooperatively with their human partners. Cooperatively. A human would carry the eagle on their arm. The eagle would hunt. The eagle would return. Preth-Saan put down her documentation tool. She sat for a moment. She picked it up again. She reached, eventually, the section of the data package that covered a category the human documentation called exotic pets, species kept as domestic, companions that were not in any conventional sense domesticated, species that were, in their natural ecological contexts, unambiguously dangerous. The list included large constrictor snakes kept in human homes as companions, large monitor lizards kept in human homes as companions, several species of spider, including varieties with medically significant venom, kept in human homes as companions, crocodilians, several species of large cat, not the domestic cat, but the actual large cats, the lions and leopards and cheetahs, kept in some human jurisdictions as companions, not domesticated, not selectively bred over thousands of years to tolerate human company, just kept by individual humans who had looked at an apex predator and decided they wanted to live with it. She finished the data package at 11 in the evening. She sat in her empty office for a long time. Then she wrote the opening line of what would become the most cited paper in the history of comparative predation analysis. The human relationship with predator species represents a fundamental challenge to the field's current theoretical model, which requires immediate and comprehensive revision. The paper took 6 months to write and went through 11 drafts. Not because the data was ambiguous. The data was extraordinarily clear, comprehensively documented and reproducible, but because the implications of the data were large enough that Preth-Saan kept finding new ones every time she thought she had reached the last one, and the paper kept growing to contain them. The central finding was not, in the end, that humans had domesticated predators. The central finding, the one that required 11 drafts to formulate, precisely enough that it could not be misread, was what the domestication of predators revealed about humanity itself. Every other species in the comparative predation analysis database had responded to predators with the response that predator pressure evolutionarily selected for fear, avoidance, and elimination. The psychological architecture of every studied sapient species carried the mark of that predator pressure, a deep, instinctual wariness of apex predators, present even in individuals who had never personally encountered one, embedded in the species' behavioral baseline the way scars embedded themselves in tissue. Humans had that architecture too. The data was clear on this. Humans had evolved under significant predator pressure. Their ancestral environment had contained multiple species capable of killing them. Large cats, wolves, bears, crocodilians, large raptors. The fear response was present. The instinct was there. But somewhere in human history, And this was the part that had required the most drafts to phrase correctly, because Preth-Saan wanted to be precise about the magnitude of what she was saying. Somewhere in human history, a subset of humans had looked at the fear response, looked at the predator, and decided to do something that no other species in the database had ever done. They had decided the predator was interesting, not useful, not manageable. Interesting. They had approached the wolf not as a threat to be eliminated or a danger to be avoided, but as a creature worthy of curiosity, capable of relationship, potentially. And this was the leap, the extraordinary leap that the paper identified as the pivotal moment. None. No insider. That. And then they had made it a companion, over 15,000 years, through patience and breeding and the particular human quality of deciding something difficult was worth the effort. They had taken an apex predator and made it into a creature that slept against their children. Preth-Saan's paper argued that this was not an anomaly in human behavioral history. It was the defining characteristic, the same quality that had looked at a wolf and seen a companion had looked at every other dangerous thing in the human environment, other humans, other predators, vast oceans, unclimbable mountains, the vacuum of space, and seen the same thing. Not a threat to be eliminated. A challenge worth attempting. The paper's conclusion read, "The human domestication of predator species is not a zoological curiosity. It is the first and most complete expression of the defining feature of human cognition, the capacity to look at something that should, by every evolutionary logic, produce only fear and feel instead. Curiosity. And then to act on the curiosity. And then over sufficient time and effort to transform the relationship entirely. The wolf became the dog. The wild became the domestic. The fear became love. We should not be surprised that the species which did this to wolves has, in the centuries since achieving space travel, been doing a version of the same thing to the rest of the galaxy. They are not conquering us. They are domesticating us. The most alarming part is that it appears to be working. The paper was published. It circulated. It was read in the Vaelthari academic community with the particular attention of people encountering a framework that reordered everything they thought they understood. It reached, eventually, the Human Diplomatic Division's cultural liaison desk. Ambassador Vasquez read it. She read the conclusion. She sent a personal message to Preth-Saan that said, "I read your paper. The wolf-to-dog argument is the most accurate description of human foreign policy I have ever encountered from a non-human source. I'm sharing it with our diplomatic training program. Also, would you like to meet my dog? His name is Professor Biscuit. I think you'd find him clarifying." Preth-Saan looked at the message for a long time. She was a scholar. She was not easily unsettled. She replied, "I appreciate the offer. I am going to need some time." She looked at the photograph Ambassador Vasquez had included in the message. Professor Biscuit was large. He was golden-colored. He was sitting with his tongue out, and his ears up, and the specific expression of a domesticated apex predator who had decided that the person holding the camera was his favorite thing in the world. Preth-Saan looked at the photograph. She thought about wolves. She thought about 15,000 years. She thought about the conclusion of her own paper. She wrote back, "He is very large." Ambassador Vasquez replied immediately, "He is a very good boy." Preth-Saan did not know what this meant. She was going to need to write a follow-up paper. Professor Biscuit visited the Vaelthari Hegemony's diplomatic compound 14 months later, when Ambassador Vasquez was rotated to a new posting and brought him along as she always did. Because Professor Biscuit went everywhere she went, and that was simply how it was. The diplomatic staff had been briefed. Preth-Saan, who had been invited as a cultural consultant, had prepared a comprehensive document on appropriate interaction protocols with Canis lupus familiaris, drawing on the full body of human literature on the subject. The document was thorough. It covered the correct approach angle, the appropriate initial distance, the significance of various ear and tail positions, and specific behaviors that the literature identified as indicating comfort versus discomfort in the animal. Professor Biscuit, who had not read the document, walked directly to the senior diplomatic attaché, a being named Kelvar, who had spent 20 years mastering the art of controlled professional composure, sat down in front of him and put one large paw on his foot. Kelvar looked at the paw on his foot. He looked at Professor Biscuit. Professor Biscuit looked back at him with the complete, uncomplicated confidence of a domesticated apex predator who had decided in approximately 4 seconds that this was someone worth knowing. Kelvar looked at Ambassador Vasquez. "He likes you," she said. Kelvar looked back at Professor Biscuit. Something happened on his face that his colleagues had not seen before in 20 years of working with him. He reached down and very carefully, with the precise movements of someone who was doing something for the first time and wanted to get it right, scratched Professor Biscuit behind the ear. Professor Biscuit's tail began to move. Slowly, at first, then faster. Then, with the complete, full-body enthusiasm of a large golden dog who has received exactly what he wanted. Kelvar watched the tail. He's in. He stopped. He started again. He's a very good boy, Ambassador Vasquez said. Kelvar scratched behind the ear again. Yes, he said quietly. He is. Preth-Saan, watching from across the room, opened her notes. She wrote, "Follow-up paper confirmed necessary. Working title, The Paw on the Foot, Secondary Evidence for the Domestication Hypothesis. Preliminary Finding. It is working on us too." She closed her notes. She walked over and waited her turn.